My name is Sikhumbuzo Dube. I am currently serving as a hospital chaplain, an executive secretary, and family ministries director. It is quite an honor to talk about the Love Spiritual Care Model as a veritable tool for bedside discipleship. In this presentation, we are going to explore various facets of this tool. When illnesses strike families and individuals, they may lose their faith. Emotional torment, spiritual relapses, and sociological disconnectedness may set in, rendering their discipleship or the discipleship of those in need of care fractured. The advent of the coronavirus has actually compounded the problem, as many have lost their loved ones or are ill. Many theological questions may be plaguing them as they are trying to find meaning in life. Pastors ministering to such individuals may find it difficult to encourage them to adhere to their espoused faith. They may find their theological training insufficient in discipling invalids and their families. The Love Spiritual Care Model is proposed as a veritable tool to help the clerics in order to provide bedside discipleship. It has the capability of creating a conducive environment for the facilitation of the growth of a Christian when they are ill. This spiritual care model draws its methodology from the way Jesus was doing his ministry. It takes into cognizance that in antiquity, being unwell was considered as a curse because of sin. So this article presents the Love Spiritual Care Model as a means for facilitating bedside discipleship. It addresses what the model entails and how a minister can apply its precepts in leading the disciples of Christ to a renewed and strengthened faith in the midst of their sickness. Furthermore, the significance of its strength in nurturing those seeking medical attention and the connection between spiritual care and discipleship is emphasized. We pick examples from the Gospels and employ them in understanding this relationship. The incessant wave of secularization, weak new member mentorship, life's challenges, cold formalism, a lack of genuine Christianity among the older church members could be some of the drawbacks to the discipleship process. Those who are young in the faith may be finding it very hard to withstand the vicissitudes of life when they are still young in the faith. And the older ones may be drifting along just to maintain their church membership while their devotion to their espoused faith is questionable. This leads to what Johnson calls a slow dry up. Speaking of the weakness of Christendom in a highly secularized world that we are living in, he made an analogy that the Christian church has entered into a new dark ages, which is characterized by a high dropout rate, particularly among teenagers, and lifeless rituals of worship punctuate the services that we are having. And so the statistics that we are having reveal, they are telling that there is a problem. The other disturbing element is that the growth rate is not equaling the retention rate. The church seems not to have the capacity to nurture the large numbers that she is baptizing. Globally, the Seventh-day Adventist Church lost 40%, which equals to 24,181,500 40,485 of the 40,421,554 members that she had since 1965. This brings the subject of discipleship to the fore and raises several questions that need our attention. What could be the factors that are threatening loyalty to the faith? How can the church transform members to be disciples of Jesus Christ? Is there anything that is faulty in our spiritual care program? Impact of physical illness on discipleship. Illnesses have got an impact on discipleship. We are going to look at these briefly. In medical terms, when a disease is systemic, it affects the whole body. In the same way, illness has an impact on the well-being, the total well-being of an individual. Illnesses affect the social connection, they affect the mental and emotional wellness, they affect the spiritual connection of an individual. The patient's physical absence from church severs the social connection, and the patient's conceptualization of the social definition of their condition affects their social connectedness. Mental affliction may affect bedside as the patient's judgment may be marred by anguish. The essence of spiritual things and an appetite of godliness may be reduced. Cruz saw emotional brokenness as a wall that stands between the sinner and his God, blurring and blocking spiritual connectedness. Consequently, spiritual growth is thwarted and the sense of worth is depleted. This will affect spiritual connection. And so there are skewed health-seeking behaviors that are impacted by illnesses. Nothing happens without a cause in an African sense. And the value that is attached to life affects this, and the deflection of cases is also a contributory factor to the skewed health-seeking behavior. In their pursuit for physical well-being, patients may violate their long-held spiritual convictions. In concurrence, Mbiti pointed out that they may resort to both hospitals and medicine men without a feeling of contradiction at all. They may go only secretly to the medicine man or follow his treatment, and they may try to deflect curses. Bedside discipleship is a biblical mandate. When Job was ill, his friends Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite made an appointment to come and sympathize with him. Job 2:11. Among the things that Jesus declared, to the extent that you did it for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did it for me. Visitation of the sick is mentioned in verse 36. James encouraged it and even added a factor of the healing of the sick and the forgiveness of sins. A closer look at the ministry of Jesus will reveal that he followed a systematic approach which made it easy for him to address the systemic nature of illness. He was able to deal with the person concerned and those connected to him. He was also able to deal with their mental and their emotional brokenness and their sociological disconnectedness and their spiritual relapses in the approach that he followed. The Love Spiritual Care Models borrows from the methodology of Jesus in order to be able to facilitate this need. It is premised on the word love and love is used as an acronym where L means linking up, and O is observing, and V is verifying, and E is empowering. The Love Spiritual Care model suggests that care provision must be systematic and premeditated. Intentionality is needed in arriving at the desired end of strengthening the disciples of Christ when the exigencies of life are overwhelming, grounding them in faith when there is emotional wreckage, spiritual relapses, and sociological disconnectedness will only be possible as the method of Jesus is followed. The presentation that we are seeing suggests that the provision of care is likely to follow a linear pattern, starting with linking up with the troubled disciple and ending up with the empowerment. This model may be appropriate to patients that the healthcare chaplain may not have a way of meeting again. A case in point is when the care seeker is about to be discharged from the hospital. The spiritual care can be linear. This figure we are seeing now presents the same model but in a secular fashion. This suggests that the program of care must transcend taking spiritual care as an event but as a process that should continue if bedside discipleship is to be effective. It involves non-ministerial clinicians who should assist in doing spiritual screening prior to the engagement of a healthcare chaplain and after he or she has implemented the goals and plans of care. It evaluates the effectiveness of the empowerment and interventions implemented on the care seeker. Let us briefly look at how this model operates. Linking up is the process where the caregiver is connecting with the care seeker and trying to facilitate the connection of the care seeker with his or her family, with the divine, and with the health care providers. Jesus utilized this approach in his ministry. When he saw the multitudes, the Bible says he was moved with compassion. Something inside him drew him close to his followers. He then sought for ways to ensure that they were also drawn to him. He was so warm and welcoming, and he was so good to be close to. And so, at the beginning of this process, the most important thing is to do spiritual assessment, which must continue throughout the process. However, linking up must punctuate every other action. Once connected, once you have linked up with your care seekers, it is very important to continue that connection because it is the one that is going to facilitate healing, because people relate to people who understand them, people who connect to them. So the initial stage is linking up, and that is connecting with the care seeker. Observation. When Jesus linked up with his care seekers, he didn't stop at that. He moved further to observe what was obtaining. He could understand the presenting situation through a process of observing what was taking place in the patient's life. Whether it could be an emotional issue, whether it could be a spiritual issue, he could ask, do you believe? That was a question of observation. When Jesus came to the important man that was laying by the pool of Bethesda, he asked a question, do you want to get well? That question was not a question that was asking on the need, on the desire to get well, but it was an observational question that was seeking to trace the depth of the malady and how this individual was suffering and what he needed. And in articulating the process, maybe the time that he had taken, the important man was able to relate, and Jesus was making observations. Clark opined that Christ, by asking this question, designed to excite in this person faith, hope, and a greater desire of being healed. He wished him to reflect on his miserable state that he might be better prepared to receive a cure and to value it when it came. Observation helps in bedside discipleship because it facilitates the sharing of the story. When we consider this man, the way he responded, he said, "Sir, I have no man. When the water is stirred, I have no man who will put me into the water." In this observational stage, the patient then opens up, and our role is listening. We are not asking investigatory questions like a policeman, but we are asking leading questions that are going to help the one suffering to open up and share their story. Let us remember, we continue with the linking up process. Our connectivity is very important. Upon entering the sick room, it is very important also to observe what is there so that it helps us to further continue connecting or linking up with the one in need of care. This is going to help us to establish what spiritual issues exist in this individual, what spiritual relapses, what spiritual disconnectedness, what social issues are evident, are existing in this individual at this time. Verifying the disciples' spiritual distress. When people are ill, they begin to do theology. They begin to ask questions and they wonder whether their espoused theology can be home for them in their troubled times, or it becomes insufficient. Having that in mind, it is very important to verify their condition, to find out, to dig more and try to find out whether the observations that we made, we could have concluded that this patient has got spiritual distress when they are having some sociological disconnectedness, or maybe they are having some emotional turmoil. So we need to verify. In the story of the woman with the hemorrhage, Jesus had verified the faith of that individual. He could be able to say, "Daughter, go well. Your faith has made you whole." Verification helps the pastor who is providing spiritual care to be able to understand exactly what recommendations to make. If the espoused faith of the individual that is suffering is becoming life limiting, then it helps the pastor to make the life-limiting espoused theology to be growth-enhancing espoused theology. As we are doing bedside discipleship, we are focusing on what is troubling the individual. We are verifying the systemic impact or the systemic nature of the illness, and thereby providing the needed enablement based on the evidence that we have gotten. Empowering the disciple. When illness strikes, there is always a controversy between espoused theology and lived theology. That controversy is in the mind of the one who is the disciple. So when doing bedside discipleship, it is very important to take into cognizance that the patient is struggling with this mental and spiritual controversy. This is the reason why Ellen White says doctrine and creed by the bedside should be avoided. The goal of the love spiritual care model is to ensure that the disciple is empowered to live above the exigencies that life is imposing upon them. It is to give them the strength to face life with resilience. The needed empowerment will be to the disciple, to his family, and all those that are connected with them. Spiritual caregivers must do what Doring calls theological empathy. This enables them to stand in the shoes of those theologically different from them and appreciate how their lived theology can be home for them in troubling and challenging times. In some cases, the sick will be in isolation and visitation may not be possible. The consistent use of media to disciple the sick members can be helpful. This may be both voice and video calls, WhatsApp chats, and other social media tools. Empowerment should also involve pastors. They should be trained in providing care to those in ill health. Taking a unit of clinical pastoral education may be empowering as they may be helped to gain skills that will aid them when lived theologies of their members are at war with espoused theologies. Conclusion and recommendations. Some attention must be given to bedside discipleship. It is the key that will empower ailing church members to withstand any dissuasions resultant from either failing to cope with illness or giving in to suggestions that are contrary to the will of God. The love spiritual care model empowers the cleric with tools to work with in the process of discipling the sick. It enables him or her to follow the method of Jesus by linking up with a care seeker, observing their brokenness, verifying the observations, and providing an evidence-based intervention program. This will ground the suffering member in faith and prevent skewed health-seeking behaviors that mar discipleship. Members need to be trained to help those who are not doing well. Helping organizations can be engaged to provide basic skills in caring for the sick. Seminaries can include a course on this subject to equip and empower the church to be able to utilize the love spiritual care model as a tool for doing bedside discipleship. With this, I thank you.